Okay, today we're going to talk about a technique that it's used. It's mostly a marketing technique. It's used for new product design for the most part, and it's called conjoint analysis. So let's see if we can learn about this. This is going to be an integral part of the case that you're going to be solving next. So hopefully this will help you understand better what's going on in the case. Okay, so let's discuss briefly why conjoint is important. So I want to give you guys a little bit of perspective. Think about designing any new product or service. Here you have an example of a service. When you're actually thinking about coming up with a new product, or in this case, a new hotel, right? There are literally at least dozens of variables that you need to decide on. And a lot of these variables, it is honestly unclear a priori what is the optimal level of each of them. So what do I mean by variables? So for example, in the case of a hotel, things that you need to consider. One, location. Where is the hotel going to be? Okay. Number two, how big the hotel is going to be. How large are going to be the rooms? What kind of amenities are offered by the hotel? Does it have a pool? Does it not have a pool? Does it have a restaurant inside of the hotel? Is there a bar? Is there live music? Right? What kind of decoration is used through the hotel? What level of service is offered? Right? So there are a lot of variables that you need to decide on. And what's going to happen is different segments are going to react differently to having some of these features or amenities. And honestly, for some segments, some of the features are going to be useless. So for example, if you're a business traveler and you're basically there for a very functional reason, probably things like a pool might not be of much interest to you. You may not have time for the pool. On the other hand, having a restaurant in the hotel will be very important because you might be in a hurry and you still need to eat, right? So not having to go somewhere else where you don't know the city and you're at the mercy of your GPS and Google Maps. It's not always the best situation. So actually having that amenity of a restaurant might actually be quite useful. On the other hand, if you're a family and you have kids, the pool is very exciting, right? Because the kids love the pool, so they just can go and play. And of course, the parents love the pool because their kids are happy, so everybody's happy. On the other hand, a restaurant maybe is not particularly interesting or appealing because with kids, going to a restaurant is always a little bit of a chore. We're always worried about whether people are going to be upset or bothered by all the ruckus and commotion that your kids are causing, right? So I want you guys to realize that more is not always better, and people are not necessarily excited about everything in the same manner or to the same degree. So because of that, when you're designing something like a product or a service, you need to really consider carefully what is adding value to the customer. And there are a lot of trade-offs that are going to happen here that are not obvious. Okay, and what conjoint does is enables you to measure the trade-offs that customers are making in their minds when they are choosing between different options, and it quantifies those trade-offs for you. So it's going to provide information that is going to enable you to design an optimal offering for that particular customer or segment if you have group customers into segments. And so this example that I have here on the slide is actually a true example. In the beginning of the 80s, Marriott decided that it was going to introduce a new chain of hotels. And to do so, what it did is it actually went ahead and conducted, at the time, probably was the largest conjoint study ever done. This involved hundreds of people, and it is a very expensive study because each person needs to be compensated for the time. Conjoint study is something that requires people to sit down usually between 30 minutes and an hour, providing you answers to questions or conducting tasks. I will describe them in detail later. So because of that, it is a very, very expensive technique. It takes a long time. It requires a very knowledgeable staff to actually design the study, conduct the study, collect the data, and analyze it. So it's not a trivial task. And this task actually was published at in a research paper form, with some modifications just to keep the secrecy of the data in place, but it was published as a case study, so we have some information about it. And what came out of the study, which apparently was contrary to what managers were suggesting at the time, is what we know as Courtyard by Marriott. So this design of a hotel is something that came out of a conjoint study, and there are many instances where conjoint studies return products that are actually successful in the marketplace. So I'm going to walk you through today what conjoint is, what are the advantages of conducting a conjoint study, also what are the challenges or problems, and when you shouldn't actually do it. And then finally, in another presentation, just to keep this one reasonably brief, I will walk you step by step how to conduct a conjoint study with some made up data, but I will also give you a spreadsheet in Excel that enables you to do your own analysis on this data and see exactly how it works. So let me walk you through the rationale for conjoint analysis. So the idea behind conjoint analysis actually comes from a combination of schools, and it combines both traditional economics that looks at consumers as some sort of rational decision makers, and also looks at the literature in psychology that deals with measuring perception and psychological traits called psychometrics. And the idea behind conjoint analysis is as follows. We assume that consumers, meaning you and me, have some sort of stable preferences about products. So what do I mean by preferences? Well, for example, in my case, if you're giving me different choices of ice cream flavors, I do have some strong preferences that are stable, and that if you try to measure them, you will see them clearly there time and time again. So for example, in my case, I am not a big fan of vanilla ice cream. Why? I don't know. I'm just not. On the other hand, I really enjoy flavors like strawberry or lemon, right? So in a situation like that, I do have some sort of stable preference that I can actually elucidate in this skin. I can just, if you ask me about it, I can tell you. And if you are a scientist that is trying to decide on a new type of ice cream in the marketplace, it will be useful for you to know what kind of preferences do I have. By the way, when I say preferences, it's not only about flavors, it could also be about the size of the package, for example, in this case, the colors that are actually used to display the brand. It could be things like price. Of course, everybody prefers a lower price for the same level of quality, but we always are going to be trading off prices for quality, right? So there's going to be a give and take. Everybody prefers a cheaper price, but to what degree a low price is important is something that is not obvious in the marketplace. These are all preferences that are innate and inherent to consumers. They exist, they are there, right? So we have preferences. And other than preferences, engineers or product designers, they don't understand preferences very well. What they understand is product attributes. These are features that the product has that maybe are going to provide you some benefits, and because of that, you're going to be able to express the preferences of the consumers through the attributes. What do I mean by this? Well, if we're talking about, let's move from ice cream. If we're talking about something like a cell phone, for example, okay, a smartphone. So if you have a smartphone, what do we mean by product attributes? Well, we're talking about things like screen size. That is a technical specification that it's going to provide maybe potentially some benefits to the consumer. So for example, in my case, if you give me a screen size that is larger than, let's say, 5 inches, it's actually not a very useful thing. So not necessarily not bigger is always better in this case, because then I won't be able to put it inside my pocket, right? So an attribute will be screen size, okay? And the idea behind conjoint is that consumers have preferences about the benefits, but those preferences are really going to be mapped if you're trying to design a new product into some sort of attributes, okay, that product or service has. So the idea behind this is, if I'm going to like or dislike a product, is because of its inherent attributes that it has, right? So if I dislike a particular watch, It's because of the shape of the watch, the size of the watch, the weight of the watch, the materials the watch is made of, the price of the watch, the brand of the watch. Those are all attributes of the product. So what we're going to try to do through Conjoint is we're trying to map those preferences and attributes so that we can understand better how to select the right level of attributes so that the product or service that we come up with is indeed the one that the consumer or consumers, if we're talking about segments, that we're interested actually prefer. So let me give you an example of how this looks like. And unfortunately, because I don't watch enough movies, I guess, I'm going to use actors that are way past their prime, especially in the case of Clint. But if you are actually in the difficult business of making content, like movies or shows, one thing that you know is that there are certain attributes that people like, right? Movies are a funny product because it has a very short lifespan, right? So usually if you're looking at box office sales, even very successful movies are not in theaters for longer than 10 or maybe 12 weeks. Okay, so because of that, it's a very short-lived product. So you prepare this product over a year or a year plus when you're developing the product, when you're shooting the movie, when you're putting it together, editing, etc. And there are certain attributes that consumers like me and you are going to use a priori to determine whether they're going to see the movie or not. And here I have three attributes, right, that I think, it's not just what I think, that studies have shown that are important when it comes down to movie preferences. First is star of the movie, okay? So one way in which many people actually decide on whether they want to watch a movie or not is depending on who's starring on that movie. So here I have two used to be stars, and they haven't been acting for a while now, which are Clint Eastwood and Eddie Murphy. This is from when I was young and I used to go to the movies. I don't go to the movies anymore, right? And you can tell, right? I could have changed those, but I will be telling you about things that I don't know. So I'd rather not do that. Okay. So this will be one attribute. Attribute number one is star. Who is starring in that movie? Okay. Attribute number two is going to be the plot of the movie. And of course, I'm going to simplify things here and assume that there are only two choices. It's either a comedy or an action movie. Okay. And then finally, another thing that might be relevant to you, maybe not to you, but to me definitely, and to families, is what is the rating of the movie, right? Is it rated R or maybe not, right? Or is it PG, whatever. I'm assuming here there are only two options, right? R or G, okay? Now, if you realize what this is doing is basically creating a product, in this case the movie, as some sort of combinatorial exercise between the different attributes. So we have three attributes. We have attribute 1, we have attribute 2, and we have attribute 3. And in this case, each attribute has two potential levels, okay? It could be that there are more than two. In a realistic study, you will have more than two, but I'm trying to keep it simple, right? So here you have level 1 and level 2, okay? That's a 2, doesn't look like a 2, okay? So Clint Eastwood will be level 1, Eddie Murphy will be level 2 for attribute 1. For attribute 2, which is the plot, level 1 will be comedy, level 2 will be action, right? So what we're doing is we're breaking down the design process of a product into attributes, which are the constituent benefits that customers actually care about, okay? And levels, which are the different options within each of the attributes. By the way, notice that you could do the same thing with price. Okay, I'm not putting price here because usually in the movie the price is set up by the theater, and there is no variance on that in this particular industry. But in other industries, if you're thinking about launching a laptop, the price of the laptop definitely could be included here in the story as one of the attributes. Okay, so the question is, I want you to see that you can just create a combination of movies by just having this setup. The question is, which one of these are you going to shoot, right? A priori. If you don't know what to do, which one will you choose, right? Now here you have another example, maybe with a few more levels, right? So this will be a car design, and I'm going to have different attributes. Here, attribute 1 is point of origin, there is some literature that says that where the car comes from is actually something that some customers care about. So we have the US, Japan, or Europe. Okay. Attribute number 2 is convertibility, which is, does it has a sunroof, does it have a removable top, or is an automatic convertible, right? Something that you push a button and the top comes down. Okay, that's one of the attributes that you could have. Another attribute that could be important to you is the number of doors in the car. Does it have 2 doors, hence it's a coupe, or does it have 4 doors and hence it's a sedan, right? Attribute number 4 is whether it has a crash mitigation system, so some sort of sensor suite that enables the car to maybe push on the brakes when there is an object in the middle of the road that you're approaching fast, right? That's something that cars tend to have now. And number 3 is some sort of performance metric. So here I have acceleration 0 to 60, which is the typical metric that is used in this industry, right? And is it 5.5 seconds, which is, reasonably fast, not super fast by today's standards, but it's decent, or is it 8.5 seconds? Okay, and again, you could have more levels here, but I'm trying to keep it simple. Now, why are we going to be using Conjoint for all this? Well, the key thing that you're going to learn from a Conjoint study is it's basically going to map or provide you with information about the preference that consumers have over this attribute set. Okay, so it's going to give you a clear idea of what combination of attributes is going to be optimal when it comes down to designing a new product if you're trying to maximize demand. So it's going to help you develop new products because it's going to give you a very clear idea about what kind of trade-offs are customers making when it comes down to these different attributes that I was alluding to, and levels, not only attributes. Also, it's going to tell you what levels are best and from which level to what level are customers making big drops or improvements in how they prefer those products. Okay, it's also going to be helpful if instead of just developing a new product, you're thinking about modifying an existing product. So if a product that you have in the marketplace is not doing very well and you want to pinpoint what kind of improvements can be made to the product, conjoint analysis can be used in a similar manner. Okay, and at the end of the day, the reason why you use it is because it enables you to see what is the optimal level of attributes for each of the important benefits when it comes down to the product design. Right? Now, how can you use Conjoint? There is more information that come out of Conjoint other than just the optimal combination of attributes. So let me give you some insight as to what kind of information you're going to get out of a Conjoint study. Number 1 that you're going to be able to see is which one of the attributes is more important and to what degree also. So it's going to give you an idea of what consumers really care about when it comes down to the collection of attributes that you have included in the study. So if you have 6 attributes in your study, for example, it's going to tell you which one or which ones, it could be that it's more than one, are particularly important to the consumer that you're measuring this for, or to the segment that you're doing the measurement, right? So it could be that for certain consumer segments, like we are mentioning before, maybe families versus business travelers, the attributes that are important might be very different. Okay, so this is not making a statement of which one is the most important attribute overall, but it's for each of the segments that you're interested in, which one or which ones of those attributes are particularly essential. You're going to be able to measure that specifically if you use Conjoint. What else are you going to be able to ascertain? Like I mentioned before, this is the most important probably part, is that it's going to give you what is the optimal combination of attributes and levels for each of the segments. Okay, so for each of the segments that you're studying, is going to tell you what will be the ideal combination or what will be the optimal product. So if you are designing a new product, this can actually be a very helpful thing to do so that you can actually, at least theoretically, get the optimal product before you actually launch the product into the marketplace. What else can you learn from Conjoint? Well, given that you already know what's out in the marketplace and you know what combinations of attributes and levels they actually have, you can estimate market shares for the introduction of a new product. So it can help you predict what your penetration is going to be for a new product and the market share. So it's going to give you a pretty good idea about the demand for the new product that you're launching. So not only is it going to tell you what the optimal combination is, but it's also going to allow you to forecast whether the product that you're launching is going to be doing well in the marketplace or not, and to what degree. So you're going to be able to see. You can do this using something called simulation. Okay, so if you're interested in any of this stuff, by the way, let me know offline, and I will be happy to point to you to more sources that you can use to work into this. Okay. What else can you use the information that you're going to get out of the Conjoint study? What you're getting out of Conjoint is essentially what the profile of the preferences are for each of the customers, or maybe each of the segments if you're grouping people into segments. So because you're going to observe the preferences of people based on the attributes, what this is going to enable you to do is going to enable you to put individual customers into groups based on their preferences. If you remember when we talked about segmentation, I was mentioning that, for example, a lot of companies use demographic information for segmentation. The reason why they use it is because they think that demographics are going to be correlated with preferences. But what Conjoint is going to give you is going to give you the actual preference profile of each customer that you have put into the Conjoint study. So the ideal metric to be used for segmentation is the actual preferences. So because we're going to get the actual preferences from Conjoint, you're going to be hard-pressed to come up with a better way of segmenting the data than doing a Conjoint study. So the Conjoint study can be used not only for optimal combination of attributes and design of products, but also to do segmentation. So you can use the profiles that you come up with from Conjoint to come up with segments that have homogeneous preferences, which is what you're trying to do. People that have similar likes, right? Things that they care about, things that they are trading off similarly. Okay, so what's important for them? You're going to be able to see this. Okay. What else is going to enable you to do? It's going to enable you to come up with new opportunities, right? Once that you understand the preferences of people, that's going to give you ideas about how to design new products and what kind of spaces you should be entering in and not. Also, it could show you segments that were not clearly defined before, right? So all these are opportunities that you're going to be able to tackle in the marketplace if you conduct a Conjoint study. Okay. And finally, you're going to be able to see the relative contribution for each of the attributes, basically, and what kind of levels you should actually have for each of them, right? So you're going to be able to see which one of the attributes are most important and to what degree people are willing to trade off between one thing and another. Okay, so you're really going to get very rich information from the study. It's very expensive, time-consuming, but you get a lot out of it. Now, let me walk you through the process on how to actually conduct the market research study. First, I'm going to go here in general, and then in a following presentation, I will walk you through how to do it with a specific example and with a specific set of numbers so that you can actually do it and hopefully follow the process carefully. So the first step in conducting a Conjoint study is selecting the attributes that you're going to have into the study. Okay, now to do this, probably you're going to be conducting some a priori exploratory study. For example, you could use customer interviews, in-depth interviews, where you sit down and talk with people that are potential customers or actual customers right now, if it's not a radically new product. And you ask them what kind of things do they look for in the different products that are already in the marketplace. If there are no products like the one you're going to introduce, maybe substitutes that are as close as possible. Okay, and that way you will see what's relevant and what's important for customers to make sure that you do not omit any important attributes. You're going to see why this is important later. If you omit important attributes, if you don't pick the key attributes that people use for evaluation of that product or service, what's going to happen is people are going to make inferences about those attributes that are not in the study, and that's going to mess up the entire set of results. So you really want to nail down what attributes go in here. Also, you cannot put everything you want to put, because otherwise the study gets too big and you need too much data, too much time, and mostly too much money. Okay, so the number of attributes needs to include everything that is really important, because of that you're going to have to do some exploratory study before, right, where you do some sort of in-depth interviews, talk to the customers. You can also use focus groups, another thing that is pretty popular for this. Okay, after you have the attributes, okay, selected, now what you need to do is you need to decide on the levels, okay, and the range, right? What do I mean by levels? So for example, if one of the attributes is price, what you're going to have to decide is, okay, if let's say that I'm doing this study, it's for, I don't know, what can we do? For a laptop, right? Like I was mentioning before. So if it comes down to a laptop, a range of prices that you might see in the marketplace, it might be between $300 and let's say $2,000, right? So that is typical within the marketplace. What you want to do when selecting the range of levels within this attribute, which in this case is price, you want to push the range a little bit out of the typical boundaries in the marketplace, just to see what will happen if you will dip your toes a little bit outside, but you don't want to go so far out that it becomes not believable. So for example, if you tell me that you're going to give me a laptop, full laptop, not just some sort of a stripped down Chromebook, but an actual laptop, let's say for $100, I'm going to be skeptical, right, as a consumer. So you want to push the boundaries a little bit, and if what you have now in the marketplace is things that are between $300 and let's say $2,000, maybe you want to push yourself a little bit beyond that, but not so much that people don't believe you. And then you need to select the number of levels. So, you know, am I going to do, for example, $250, $500, $1,000, and then maybe 1,500, I don't know, whatever number of levels, right? So with the number of levels, you also need to be careful, because if you put too many levels, that's going to require a lot of people and data to actually be able to estimate the trade-offs that people are making. So you want to have sufficient enough of levels that is going to enable you to make the right decision, right? On the other hand, you don't want to have so many levels that you really need a lot of people into your study, and hence a lot of money to actually learn about these trade-offs that you're making between money and maybe other features or other attributes of the product. Okay. Then after selecting the number of levels and the range of values, you're going to create the stimuli that you're going to use for the study, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in the next slides about what you can do with that. Okay, and then you need to determine who's going to be answering this study, so who's going to be participant in the conjoint study, right? Is it a profile of customer that you're interested in, right? You're going to have to probably pay them some money to actually give up at least an hour of the time sitting down with you and just going through the questions carefully. You're going to have to collect then the data on that sample, right, on the group of people. And after you collect the data, you're going to do the analysis, which I'm going to walk you through a little bit. We're going to do a simple version of it. Okay. Now, I've already talked about most of this, right? So first, select the attributes. The most important part is all the really important attributes need to be there. So to do that, conduct some focus group or in-depth interviews first, making sure that you don't forget anything critical. If you forget something that is really important, people will put it in there even if it's not there. They are going to make assumptions about it based on the other things that are in there. So for example, if you forget to put a price, people will make assumption about price based on the features. Okay, you need to be careful with this. On the other hand, if you have so many attributes, people are going to go crazy, right? Because there is too many questions to answer. So you don't want to overload respondents. There are ways of getting around this that are more fancy than what I'm going to describe in this class, but I don't want to go into advanced methods. We'll just assume that you need to pick a number of attributes, typically anywhere between 3 and maybe 8 if you're pushing the boundaries, okay? So you're really talking about the 4 to 5 most important attributes in that particular product category or service. As you can see, there's no difference. And then pick the right levels. Like I said, the levels should be a little bit pushing the boundary of what you find in the marketplace, but they cannot be so different that they become unrealistic. People will discount them there, right? So maybe push a little bit the edge on the levels, but not so much that it becomes unrealistic. Okay. So here is how the stimuli will look like. This is a simple example, right? If we're talking about my movie example before, what you will do is you will prepare cards for each of the levels that you're considering and each of the combinations. So you will have an action movie, right? That was one of the attributes, was whether it was action or comedy, right? That's starring Eddie Murphy and it's rated R. So this will be a combination of the attributes, and you will give the card to cards that will look like this to each of the respondents. And what you will ask them to do is you will ask them to rank them from the most preferred option to the least preferred option. Now, as you can imagine, as the number of attributes and levels becomes bigger, the number of cards that people need to sort gets so large that people don't know how to rank them. This is why you need to keep the number of attributes and levels reasonable. Okay. In my experience, and I think every people that have done any study in psychology and psychometrics, people have a hard time organizing more than 30 or 40 cards. So that limits quite a bit how many attributes and how many levels you can have. In the case of the movie example, you have 3 attributes, each one has 2 levels, so there is a total of 8 cards. That is not a problem at all for anybody to arrange from the most preferred to the least preferred. Okay. Now, do you have to stick to cards? No. You can do more fancy things. That's the simplest scenario to create the stimuli that is going to enable you to collect the data. You can do computer renders. So if you are collecting the data on a computer, you can just show a 3D semi-realistic version of the product using some sort of CAD or design software. And that's one option, right? You could use something like SolidWorks, for example, for that. Another option is you can actually make prototypes and give them to people. If you're talking about something that looks very different from what's in the marketplace, it might actually be worthwhile to do this, especially given the fact that now we have 3D printing and other rapid prototyping techniques that were not available before, right? So it's a lot more expensive than doing the little cards, right, that just describe what it is that you're doing. But sometimes if you're talking about design, for example, this could be a very important step. Right, so it really depends what it is that you're doing, right? And there are other things you can use like trade-off matrices, but I'm not gonna talk much about that. It's just a different way of collecting the data. It doesn't really add much to our story. Now, let me walk you a little bit through how this will look with a little bit more realistic scenario. So I'll show you the card design, right? And I'm going to show you here how 18 cards will look in that scenario, of course, in a simplified fashion, right? So card number 1, it's right here. Card number 1 will look like this, right? So it will be a car made in the US that has a sunroof. That's what the second attribute means. That it's a sedan, so it has 4 doors. It doesn't have crash management system, and it accelerates 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds. That will be my card number 1. So I will give this card to a customer, right? And I will proceed to do the same thing with all the other cards. So in this case, there are 18 cards, right? So I'm going to pick card number 18 just to make sure that everybody understands what this means. So there will be 18 little cards, right? And the last card that I give to the customer will say that the car is made in Europe, maybe Germany. It just says Europe, so we don't know what it's made within Europe, right? And it has an automatic convertible rooftop. So if you push a button, the whole thing collapses in the back somewhere in the trunk, right? It's a sedan, so it has 4 doors, and it does have crash management system, and it accelerates 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, right? Now, what you do not have in the cards, and that's what you get out of the conjoint study, is this column right here. This is the data that you're gonna get. So what you're gonna ask this customer that has come to your office, whatever you're collecting this data, right? And it's gonna spend maybe 30 minutes conducting this task, is you're gonna explain carefully how the cards function and what they mean. And then you're gonna ask this person to organize these 18 profiles or cards from the most preferred one, which in this case is this one right here for this customer, to the least preferred one, which in this case, and this customer, the card that he prefers the least is this one right here. Okay, and that task can take quite a bit of time, as you can imagine, right? The more cards there is to organize, the harder the task becomes, because a lot of them are going to be close, right? So you can see that this gentleman or lady, I don't know what it is, right over here, prefers a European car that is an automatic convertible top sedan and has crash mitigation and is fast. Let's see what it moves to after that. So his second most preferred option is, let me erase what's on top to make sure that you guys can see it. It's a Japanese car that has a sunroof. It's a coupe, and it does have crash mitigation system and acceleration 5 to 5 seconds. Now, if you notice this, what's happening is this gentleman over here, he wants to maintain these 2 features, so he's not willing to trade off crash mitigation system and acceleration, but it's going to be happy to trade on the other aspects from the most preferred to the least preferred one. So you can see how he's not willing to trade off things like acceleration of crash management system, but he is willing to trade off whether it's a convertible and what style of car is it, whether it has 2 doors or 4 doors. So different customers are going to be trading off different aspects, and this data collection method is going to tell you exactly what those are. And that's what we're going to measure next. But this is how the data looks, right? This is how the profiles look, and the data you get out of the study is this little column right here. This is the data. All this, these are the profiles that you create, right? That's what I mean by stimuli. Okay. Now let me show you some possible results, right? This is what you could find if you analyze the data before. And by the way, the way you do the analysis, like I'm going to show you later, is using regression analysis. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you know regression analysis. If you don't, what I will do is I will post another lecture, but probably not today, probably tomorrow, okay, where I walk you through basic regression analysis. There is a lot more to regression than what I'm going to cover in class, but I'm going to at least give you a taste for what the basic results are so that you can understand how this analysis was actually conducted. Okay, but I will do that in a different lecture. Okay, so we'll post a little lecture that will be something like linear regression or something like that, maybe 1 or 2, I don't know how many I will need to cover the basic results. Okay, now let me show you what you get out of analyzing that data that I showed you. That data, by the way, is from one customer and one customer only. Okay, you can collect data on, let's say, 100 customers, and you will get 100 different diagrams if you collect on 100 customers. So this creates the preference profile for each of the customers in the study. Okay, so here you have 3 of the attributes. I'm going to look at price. What do we have? Yeah, what kind of convertible it is, and finally, I'm also going to look at this crash mitigation system. And what are the preferences of people, right? So we have here preferences. Preferences, by the way, in economics, and it's measured in utiles. Utiles are this unobserved metric, right, that really doesn't exist except in our own minds, right, that we use to basically select things that we like or things that we like less, right? So it's kind of like a metric of how much you like something. And in reality, this is not observable, right? So we are inferring this based on their choices. So these are the numbers that are most consistent with the choices that you have seen in the previous slide. Okay. So here you have price. What can we see from here? Well, notice that in the x-axis here we have different levels of price, and just to make it a little bit confusing, I have here the largest price to your left, and then it's decreasing. So price is decreasing this way. The reason why I do this is because I'm assuming everybody knows this, but people prefer lower prices over higher prices. So to keep consistency with all the other things that you're going to see later, I'm just ordering it backwards, because price always has a negative preference when it comes down to people, right? So people don't want to pay more for the same thing. Okay, and when you have in the y-axis are your utils, right? So in this axis over here, the higher something is, the more you like it. Okay, so higher levels of the diagram means more preference. Okay, now let me erase this so that we don't confuse things up. And of course it's not erasing. Anyway, so what can you see here? You can see that the lowest utility for this person, that it's pretty rational, I would say, it's at a price of $18,000. So that's the price that they prefer the least. It gives them 0 utils, right? On the other hand, if you drop price by $1,000 to $17,000, they increase their utility by 30 utils. So they like this better because their utility is higher, right? Their preference is higher. And finally, if you drop it to 16,000K, it still increases a little bit more, but now instead of going from 30 to 60, it goes from 30 to 40. So you can see here right away that lower prices are better, but it seems like you have diminishing marginal returns. What do I mean by this? Well, first it increases sharply, but then it increases a little bit more. Let's see if I can diagram that for you. So you can see that the slope is becoming shallower, which tells you that, yes, you prefer lower prices, but eventually it adds a little bit less enjoyment or utility to this customer. Then you have convertible, right? So it seems like this person prefers having a sunroof as the least preferable option, which has 0 utility. By the way, I scale utilities at 0, but you can scale them in different ways, and the reason why is because they are not observed. So the only metric that you get in reality is relative between different options. So because of that, you can scale them all at 0, which is what I'm doing right here. Okay, so I set the lowest at 0, and then everything else follows from that. Okay, but anyway, that's a technical aspect. It doesn't really matter. The important part is sunroof is the lowest. Then there is a small increase if you have a manual convertible. So if you actually have to, undo things, and then, maybe you yourself push that roof back into the trunk of the car, right? This is better than a sunroof because you can actually drive the car with the top down, which is nice, at least if the weather's nice, right? And then finally, there is quite a bit of jump of going from manual to automatic. You can see it jumps by 40 utils again. Okay, so in this case, it seems like, the preference, it's almost indistinguishable, just a little bit better manual to sunroof, but not a big bump, and then it jumps quite a bit to automatic. And then finally, you have crash mitigation, and you can see that crash mitigation is preferred, which you will expect, but doesn't have to be, right? And you can see that it's kind of a moderate effect. It's not the big 30 or 40 util jumps that we have seen in the other cases. But it's definitely more than moving from sunroof to manual. So this is the kind of results that you could see. This could be from respondent 1, but then you could have respondent 2, right? And it could have a very different profile, right? In this case, the price looks pretty similar. In fact, it's the same, right? But notice, interestingly, in this case, this profile has changed. Right, so you have the whole convertible aspect has changed. Now manual is the least preferred option. Now it's scaled at 10 instead of being scaled at 0. Right, you could rescale all this by dropping everything by 10, and then you will get maybe a more accurate depiction for comparing the two diagrams. But at the end of the day, the shape is what matters, right? You can see that Sunroof is second in terms of preference to manual and convertible roof. And then finally, again, the most preferred is automatic. And also you can tell that crash mitigation system is more important than before because the jump in utility is higher. Right, so you can see how different people are different and they're going to value things differently. So what Conjoint is going to give us is going to give us a depiction of how those attributes map to the preferences of people. And it's going to enable us to pick what will be the optimal combination of attributes. Okay. Now, what can you do with this? Like I said, you can just do the obvious thing, which will be pick the highest levels, and based on that, do the optimal combination of attributes for a particular customer or segment, if you're doing segmentation based on this. Okay. On the other hand, you can also see what the market shares are going to be for new products into the market if you have information for these attributes in existing existing products. This is something that you can collect at the same time that you're doing the study on your own products, the new product in this case, just so that you can predict what the forecast will be for the market share. And the reason why you can do this is because you can see who will buy what based on the preferences that you have mapped. So once that you have the map preferences like in the diagram before, now if I know what the levels are for my competitors for these different components, now I can predict market share or purchases for each individual, and based on that I can create market share, right? So by doing this, you're going to be able to make forecasts about new product introductions before the introduction of the product. That is going to give you at least an idea of what expected demand is prior to the introduction of the product. So it's a useful tool not only for design of the product, but also to forecast demand and maybe determine levels of capacity needed if you're talking about a service based on this forecast of demand / market share. Now, what are the things that can go wrong with this? Like any other technique, there are situations that are going to impose limitations and potentially create trouble when it comes down to conjoint. First, conjoint is not for everybody or to be used all the time, even though most large companies use conjoint when it comes down to their product design. That doesn't mean they do it all the time. The reason why is because it is a very expensive and complex technique to actually implement. So not everybody uses it, and definitely not everybody uses it all the time. Okay. Conditions where it works better. Conjoint works a lot better when you're talking about an established product category. If you're talking about a very, very new product that nobody has seen, a radical technology that is going to create new industries, conjoint doesn't work as well. And the reason why is because people don't have a strong preference set already created for the different attributes. People don't know what those attributes do because maybe they've never seen that product before, right? So because of that, if you have a radical new technology, conjoint is probably not the best tool for getting the design right. Conjoint can work very well, though, for existing product categories where we are trying to do is work on incremental innovation. You're trying to improve on what you already have. Okay. Now, what are the biggest things you need to watch out for? First, you should always put on the most important attributes. If you forget one attribute, people will infer the values of that attribute based on the other attributes. So for example, if you don't put price into a study and there are two laptops, one that has really good specs and another one that has really poor specs, people are going to assume, even though necessarily it doesn't have to be true, that the one that has the high specs is going to have a high price and they are going to display their preferences accordingly. So you need to put on every relevant attribute. Okay. On the other hand, if you have too many attributes and too many levels, the studies are going to become so long and tedious that people are going to get overwhelmed. If you have 100 cards to organize, you're not going to get any meaningful information out of them. So because of that, you're going to have to trade off between the accuracy of the study and overwhelming respondents. So you're going to have a reasonable number of attributes. In my experience, 4 to 5 or maybe 6 attributes, and then 2 or 3 levels. That's what you're going to be able to handle. Otherwise, it's going to run out of the number of cards that people can organize. Now, a solution for this is to use a different data collection method called choice-based conjoint, which uses a different method for collecting the data. If you're interested, you should look it up. It's what almost every company uses right now. So what I'm showing you is the simplest original version of conjoint, but there are more fancy and esoteric versions that use something called choice-based. The problem with choice-based is that you actually need to understand more complicated models for analysis. Instead of just doing regression, you need to do things like logit or probit regression, which is not that hard, but that's more of an grad level analysis, so I'm not going to get into that. But if you're interested, I will be happy to direct you into the right tools and resources for this. And if you want to do it, I'll be happy to show you how to do it. I've done it before, so it's not like we couldn't do it. It just takes a little bit more dedication and time. Okay. Also, like I said, you need to watch out for the levels that you pick in the attributes. If they are very unrealistic, people are going to discount the options. So you don't want to do that. Push the edges a little bit, but not too much. And then the last, and maybe not the least, is that remember, all these techniques are done, the analysis should be done at the individual level. So if you start grouping customers, unless you do some sort of segmentation, if you group them all together and they are actually different, all your results are not going to work very well. So if you are aggregating customers, you need to make sure you segment first. You make sure that people are pretty similar if you're putting them together, and then aggregate so you can get the right results.